Welcome to the Moss Report with your host, Dr. Ralph W. Moss.
Hi, welcome to the Moss Report. I am Rachael Moss. I'm here speaking today with Chris Joseph, cancer survivor and author of the book Life is a Ride. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. So, can you tell us a little bit about your initial diagnosis and how you started your cancer journey?
Yes, in October of 2016, so about 4.5 years ago, I was shocked to learn that I had third stage pancreatic cancer. I had been having some digestive issues, minor. I thought I had a virus. I had no pain, so I was definitely very, very much surprised. Um, Initially, I started on a journey. Well, let me back up. I did what a lot of patients I think do, which is listen to your doctor uh, without asking questions. And they wanted me on chemotherapy. And so I did that for a few months and it was not working. My tumor was getting larger and um, the chemo was killing me. So I quit in March of 2017. And I'm going to stop here, but I'll just say quitting chemotherapy was the best decision that I ever made.
Was your oncologist initially receptive to questions or suggestions that you had about complementary things with the chemo, or was he dead set on just chemo being your path to health?
Um, I'm careful to not be critical, because I've had some really good doctors. But to answer your question directly, my first oncologist was not good and was not receptive to any questions, let alone questions about complementary therapies or anything to help during the chemotherapy treatment. He was he was he would get a pained look on his face, cut off questions. Yeah, he just didn't want any part of it.
And how long did your meetings with your oncologist last, just out of curiosity?
When I was there for 10, 15 minutes maybe. I mean, maybe the first visit was longer, but I
Uh,
would
Mhm.
say other than that 10 or 15 minutes.
Chris, was the chemo FOLFIRINOX?
Boy, if my girlfriend was on this podcast,
Mhm.
she would know a lot better.
How many drugs were there?
Well, there was different things he tried when things weren't working, but I think it was a combination of three,
Mhm.
and then he tweaked it a few months in when it wasn't working, and it still wasn't working after he made the tweak.
And where was this
In Los
geographically?
Angeles at
Mhm.
UCLA, West LA.
I see. Okay.
So, what
Mhm.
was the point at which you quit the chemotherapy and you decided that you wanted to explore other options?
Um, when I was feeling so lousy 4 or 5 months after I started chemo, my girlfriend actually took me to emergency at UCLA hospital because I was feeling like I thought I was going to die.
Mm.
Obviously, I didn't. But the next morning, I woke up. I was out of the hospital. I was scheduled to go back for chemotherapy the next day, and I told my girlfriend that it was sort of spur of the moment. I didn't really give it a lot of thought. Um, but I just told her I was going to quit chemo. I just didn't want any more part of it. I didn't want chemo to kill me. I thought, okay, maybe I'll die, but I'll die of cancer, and that would be the more preferable approach at that point. I had no plan B at that point. It was I didn't want to do chemo anymore, and so I stopped.
Where did you
Mm.
go from there?
Um, Quitting, as I mentioned, turned out to be the best day. Because it opened up a world of alternatives that I knew nothing about, both Western and non-Western. Um, I have a regular doctor here in Los Angeles that is practices complementary medicine. She's an MD, but also does a lot of alternative stuff.
Mhm.
So I started doing some infusions with her, vitamin drips, mistletoe. Um, But I also did some research on a clinic in Germany, in Frankfurt, that a friend had gone through for bladder cancer. And so I wound up doing both of those things. I was getting treatment here in LA, and then I went to Germany for 3 weeks. Did a lot of some of the same treatments there, but also lateral, stem cell. Well, I'm blanking out. Oh, hyperthermia. There's probably about 8 or 9 different things I was doing in Germany. When I came back from Germany in May of 2017, the FDA had just approved Keytruda for pancreatic cancer.
Mhm.
And one quick thing. It turned out when you asked me about my first oncologist, he actually misdiagnosed me, which of course I didn't know at the time. Now it wasn't that I didn't have a tumor in my pancreas, I did, and it wasn't that I mean it was third stage, but his words to me when I was first diagnosed were, "You have a very garden variety form of pancreatic cancer." Now I don't know that any patient wants to hear that because when you have cancer, nothing is garden variety.
Hmm.
Um, but he misdiagnosed it. It turned out my regular doctor had the presence of mind a few months later to take the biopsy, send it to a lab back east, and it turned out I had a very rare form. 1 in 100 uh, cancer pancreatic cancer patients have what I have. It's called microsatellite instability (MSI), and chemo was well known not to work on that kind of pancreatic cancer. Um, but the Keytruda was approved for that 1 in 100 type of cancer. So I started doing that too. I was doing both Western and non-Western.
What was the name of the clinic in Germany? Do you recall?
Yes, it's called Infusio, Infusio in Frankfurt.
Mhm.
Were there any doctors in Germany that you worked with very closely, or was it mostly arranged through your doctor in LA?
There was a doctor there. He's no longer with Infusio. He's practicing in another clinic in Frankfurt. Um, I should also mention it was all outpatient there. I was going in daily during the weekdays for about 4 or 5 hours of treatment, and then I'd have afternoons, evenings off, weekends off. But it was very nurturing. I have no doubt that it helped me. It certainly helped my body heal from the chemo, but I think it also helped with the cancer as well.
Mhm. And was that was is that doctor in LA somebody we perhaps know?
The doctor that I didn't like, or the doctor I did like?
The integrative doctor.
Oh, her name is Melanie Giesler, Gisler.
Uh-huh.
So I don't know if you know her at all. She
Yeah.
she works with Nasha
Oh
Winters.
yeah.
Hmm.
Is she a naturopath?
No, she's a DO. Actually, I think I misspoke earlier when I said
Uh-huh.
MD. She's a
Uh-huh.
DO,
Yeah.
but she practices a lot of alternative stuff.
Yeah. Nash has been on our show.
Okay,
Yeah. Yeah. So this is when did all this take place? What year was that?
diagnosed in October 2016, and my non-chemo journey started in March of 2017.
Uh-huh. It took coming up
When did
on
you?
4 years now since you started
Um,
it. Almost five, really, coming up
Yeah,
in
since I was
October.
yeah, in October it'll be 5 years,
Hmm.
and there just aren't a lot of sadly,
No.
there aren't a lot of, 3rd stage pancreatic cancer survivors. I call it thrivers because 'cause I'm doing
Yeah.
great.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I mean, I certainly hope that number gets a whole lot better than it is now.
Yeah. And is there any sign of cancer in your body at this time?
Yes, so there's, still a some sort of mass in there. It's about 30% smaller than when I first got diagnosed 4.5 years ago.
Hmm.
It's stable. Um, it actually a couple months ago, my new oncologist, did a scan. It grew a very tiny bit,
Hmm.
so they put me back on Keytruda for a
Hmm.
few months, which I'm doing now.
Hmm.
Um, but I'm also still doing a lot of other stuff just at home. I still do mistletoe. I do a lot of different supplements. I do infrared sauna every day. I work out a couple hours every day, do yoga, meditation, trying to eat right. I'm not sitting here idle,
Hmm.
um, letting it dominate my life.
Hmm. And your immune system is strong?
I think so. I have. I mean, if you're asking me
Mhm,
related to COVID, I have not had COVID.
mhm,
I'm very careful when I'm outside, but
mhm,
I have traveled. I took 7 trips in the last year.
mm,
I live close to the beach, so I walk on the beach almost every day.
mhm.
I'm working full time, although I have to work from home right now, given
Yeah.
what we're going through. Yeah, I think my immune system is really, really strong.
Mhm.
What do you
And
feel has? Oh, sorry.
no, go ahead.
Oh, uh, what do you feel has made the biggest difference in terms of your outlook and continuing the self care through the recovery and thriving process?
I don't think it's any one thing in particular. It's certainly some of the things I've mentioned already, but the biggest, so now I'm going to contradict myself. The one thing that changed was when I decided to take control of my own healthcare. Now, that's not to say that I became an expert overnight, and I'm not even an expert now, but I trusted myself when I knew I wasn't feeling well with chemo,
Mhm,
that it wasn't the right path. And as I said, it just opened up a lot of possibilities. I learned to ask, not be afraid to ask questions of medical providers. I learned that I make the decisions, even if they're not popular with some of my doctors. Um, I really do think that that was a game changer for me.
have you had any contact with any of your other physicians? I mean, from the past or other conventional docs that you may have been in touch with?
The first oncologist who I mentioned, I have had no verbal communication with him. I sent him a copy of my book,
Mhm,
and I changed his name in the book because I didn't
mhm.
want to get in any kind of trouble.
No.
But I wanted him to know, not out of
Mhm,
revenge or anything like that, but I just
yeah.
wanted him to know that I was and am doing well.
Mhm. Did he respond?
He is not, and I didn't figure he would. That's not the
Mhm,
kind of person he is.
mhm. Did you
What
think
was
that
the?
they'd be
Yeah, no, you.
curious about, something they don't see every day, even with aggressive chemo?
I I may be speaking out of turn here. I don't think he has a very curious mind.
Mhm,
I think he knew what he knew, and in fairness to him, and I do want to try and be fair, I had met some people at his clinic that had been going through treatment with him for a long time, and they seemed to
mhm,
be doing well.
yeah.
So I do think that he helped some people,
Mhm,
but he didn't help me.
mhm, mhm. Yeah.
Which actually brings up another thing which I think is one of the difficulties with the Western medicine paradigm. I don't believe there is a one size fits all.
Mhm.
But I think somehow that's how we practice, or how medicine is practiced here in the U.S.
Right, very much so. I mean,
Hmm.
they'll make exceptions, but it's always so there's a certain amount of adjustment based on age or general health, but the guidelines are the guidelines. There's very strict rules about what you can give and not give, and and they are comfortable with that.
Right, and what I've learned, I'm sure you know this better than I do, that with standard of care, that some doctors, even if they want to do something different, can't.
Right.
Their hands are tied by the insurance companies. They're not going to get reimbursed if
Right.
they practice out of the box. So yeah, it's like I said, I think Western medicine helps a lot of people, but I think it also can hurt a lot of people as well.
Absolutely.
We would like to take a moment to thank our Patreon subscribers for helping to make this program possible. If you would like to have access to exclusive content, including transcriptions, episode recaps, and special offers, become a patron today at patreon.com/mossreports.
So, what are the messages that you would want to convey to other people who might be either dealing with the same type of cancer or other kinds of cancer? What do you think are the main takeaways from your situation?
I think that what I learned over the last 4.5 years, I was getting a lot of calls from people from
Mhm.
other pancreatic cancer patients or their friends or family, people I didn't know, but
Mhm.
they had heard about my story from other people, mutual friends. And I was always quick, and still I'm quick to tell people that I don't give advice
Yeah.
because every situation is different.
Mhm.
And I don't necessarily think people should do what I do or what I did. But I do think what I realized when I was talking to these people, and I still talk to people regularly, that I was offering hope. And I think that's the biggest takeaway that I would like to get across to anyone who's listening to this, that there is hope. There is hope. I'm not plugging my book. I give it away, and if anyone wants a copy of my book, they can email me at chrisjoseph@mac.com, and I will send it to them for free, um, because I think my book offers hope.
Chris, when you were you mentioned that you were doing far infrared sauna, right?
Hmm.
Did you have that sauna at the time that you began your treatment?
I did not. That's a great question. I actually just started that a couple months ago.
Mhm.
I bought a infrared sauna, and I have it here at the house. I'm in it about an hour a day every day, and I wish I would have had it four
What
and a half years ago.
what kind is it?
Therasage.
Uh-huh. And I guess you did a lot of research before you got that, or?
Um, I guess it depends how you define a lot. I did some, not a lot. I think there's a group on Facebook, which I think you guys are on, called Alternative Cancer Therapies.
Mhm.
Um, and there was a thread about that, about different infrared saunas. And then I
Mhm.
did some research on that. I looked at some reviews. I called the manufacturer just to get, to answer some questions.
Mhm.
There may be other really good ones out there. In fact, I'm sure there are. But
Mhm.
this is the one I decided that was good for me.
Mhm. The reason I ask is because it's unusual, as you said, for pancreatic cancer to have microsatellite instability, which predisposes you to respond to immunotherapy like Keytruda. Um, but I was looking at an article just this week about the beneficial effects of hypothermia on making people more responsive to immunotherapy. Hypothermia sort of sets the tumor and the immune system up for a confrontation by making the cancer more visible to the immune system. So
Right,
that's fascinating because hypothermia and far infrared sauna are close cousins.
right,
They're not exactly the same, but they're more alike than they are different.
right. My understanding is the hyperthermia has slightly higher temperatures.
Yes,
Um,
2 degree on average 2 degrees Fahrenheit
right,
higher. Mhm.
right.
How long
My
can you stay in the sauna?
Um, I it's no more than an hour.
Uh-huh.
Sometimes, every day is different. Some days I tolerate it better than others, or meaning that after 45 minutes, I just feel like I'm done.
Uh-huh.
Or if I have a busy day and I just don't have time to spend an hour in it.
Uh-huh.
My simple test, though, is, and maybe this is another lesson to tell your listeners, is what I'm doing making me feel good?
Mhm.
And without an ounce of doubt, doing an hour a day of that infrared sauna is making me feel good.
Mhm. Yes, I think that's a good rule of thumb, even for
Hmm.
people taking supplements. If it doesn't agree with you, you probably shouldn't be taking it. It's the exact opposite of the philosophy, the more, no pain, no gain, which is sort of the chemo mantra.
Right. Right. Yes. Just to speak on the chemo radiation surgery
Yeah.
thing for a second. Like I said, I know it helps a lot of people. For me, it doesn't make sense logically, because while it could work in terms of reducing or eliminating a tumor, it doesn't deal at all with how did that tumor get there?
Mhm.
What's going on in your body that causes cancer or cause a tumor to grow and spread?
Mhm.
And that's why I think I actually have modified my thinking over the last few years. And when asked, I will tell people, if you're going to do Western medicine, and I don't discourage that, but if you're going to do Western medicine, try and do a lot more things that will help, like eat right, try and get some exercise if you can,
Hmm.
appropriate supplements, that kind of thing.
Hmm. Yeah.
Did your oncologist have any suggestions initially about diet and exercise, or was he focusing just on the chemicals?
The first oncologist, no, in fact, never spoke to me about diet, and as I said, was not receptive to any questions about that. My oncologist that I've had for the last 3.5 years, that where I go to do the Keytruda, um, he's more open to what I talk to him about. He doesn't encourage it, but his feeling is, that, eh, well, maybe it'll help, maybe it won't. It probably won't hurt you. I mean, the truth is, I don't think he really wants to hear about it, but he's not against it.
Hmm.
Well, that's lucky.
Yeah, that is lucky.
What has been the most challenging part of this whole journey for you?
Wow, that's a great question. Well, certainly getting diagnosed, learning the shocking news 4.5 years ago was extremely challenging. Dealing with the first few months, thinking I was going to die. Um, it's still challenging because the reality is we're all going to die. It's a question of how and when. Um, as I mentioned earlier, I still have some sort of tumor in my body. So once in a while, I think about that, and that can freak me out. Um, I look at my life. I'm turning 65 this year. I look at my life as, my life before cancer and my life after cancer. The life after cancer is definitely more challenging, but it's also in some ways much more fulfilling.
Mm.
Did you ever have a PET scan, a PET?
I did not. All my scans have been CT.
The reason I ask is because it would be really interesting to see metabolically what has happened to your cancer, because the size of a cancer that's not growing, that's stable, and that has a low score on a PET scan, one would tend to wonder if if that cancer if the cancer's stem cells hadn't been knocked out in the course of the treatment. So, in other words, that the minority of cells that drive, by most accounts, that drive the growth of the cancer only constitute somewhere between 1/10 of 1% and 10% of the overall total. So, if you kill off the cancer stem cells that, as I say, are the kind of the driving force, you could still be left with a mass, but a mass without, like an army without its leadership. It's not going to go anywhere, and so it's possible that that's what you're looking at. Now that it's growing a little bit, maybe that would show up also in terms of the PET scan. Unfortunately, the PET scan has some radioactivity to it, so it isn't entirely innocuous itself. But when it's done for other purposes, it yields up a lot of good information.
I in fact, I was just talking to another pancreatic cancer patient earlier this week, and he had said he told me he had had a PET scan, and like I said, I've never had one.
Hmm.
But it might be something for me to bring up with my doctor. It's probably a good idea.
Yeah, I mean, because it's especially if they're ordering it anyway, it does yield. There's no other way that I know of to know what's going on metabolically within the cancer, but obviously something happened with your cancer that knocked the forward motion out of it, and usually what that is has to do with either the restoration of normal metabolism to the cells, or else getting at the cancer stem cells, which are the class of cells that are the most difficult to kill with chemo or radiation. So it would be fascinating to see if those cells had basically returned to normal after you had done the
Hmm.
combination of things that you talked about.
It's a great idea. I will talk to him about it. Thank you.
Yeah.
Um, can you tell me a little bit about what's in your book?
The book is a short 170 some page memoir of my journey over the last 4 years. I started writing it actually in March of last year of 2020, right when the pandemic hit,
Mm.
because I had a little more free time. Sorry, my dog is barking.
Mhm.
Because there's a delivery truck out here. Um, and it was published in September of last year, a few months ago. And it's really a straightforward memoir. It's not a how-to book. As I said, I don't like giving advice. Um, but I wrote it because I was getting so many inquiries from people, and I realized this is a good story.
Mhm.
Surviving and thriving pancreatic cancer is a really good story. So
Mm,
that was why I wrote the book.
wonderful.
And
And
what
people who want a
mm,
copy can email you at chrisjoseph@mac.com.
They can, and I hope they do.
what kind of responses have you gotten to the book?
Really, really positive. I mean, admittedly, some of these are friends and family, but I've got over 100 5-star reviews on Amazon.
Mm.
Um, it's probably sold about 1,000 copies or so in a
Mhm.
few months, which for a independent book is not terrible.
Yeah,
I get a lot of feedback from people who say they read it and it's given them hope, which is exactly what I wanted. Yeah. Some people won't read it because some people just don't want to read about cancer, and I get that. I totally respect that. But yeah, I'm grateful for the people who have read it.
that's great. It's a wonderful thing that you've done because people are sort of conditioned to think of pancreatic cancer as a, in the later stages as a death sentence. But and hope is so important. It We now know from various things, various studies and so forth, that um, having a hopeful attitude correlates with increased survival. So it's actually things like performance status, being able to go about your business, go about your life, being pain free, so forth. These are not just little side benefits to the treatment. They're actually part of the treatment.
I think so. I mean, I've made a conscious effort to work even when I was doing chemo,
Yeah.
um, and it kept my mind off of what I was going through, or at least kept my
Hmm.
mind off some of it.
Hmm.
I definitely think being active is a part of helping to recover.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, is there anything else you'd like to add before we wrap up?
Just one thing on my end, Dr. Moss, I didn't know about you until a few months ago, and now I know a lot about you, and I think you're a hero.
Oh, thank
I
you.
think you're a real hero for what you have done over the last few decades. So thank you.
Thank you. That's very nice of you to say.
Well, thank you so much for joining us, Chris. You have been listening to The Moss Report, speaking with Chris Joseph, talking about his cancer journey and his recent book. You can again email him at chrisjoseph@mac.com. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you for listening to The Moss Report. Visit our website at themossreport.com and subscribe to hear more discussion of cancer treatment options, alternative research, and more. For more information about Dr. Moss and his work, including scheduling phone consultations, go to mossreports.com.